Gigi. This is not part of the plan. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's a beautiful day here in Birmingham, and I'm spending the day in the studio. By the studio, I mean this random bedroom in my house that I turned into a studio. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about how I make music at home. I've done all of my own work from home, all of the recording, writing, mixing, mastering, everything of my own work with some Modest and a couple other side projects I've done here and there, all out of this bedroom studio. People ask me a lot how I set up my gear, what kind of gear I use, what do I need to actually make a record at home. And today I'd like to just go through that whole chain end to end, from my guitars, the effects I use, and the recording software I use at kind of a bird's eye level, to just show everybody that you don't need too much to set up a home studio that you can get great results in. Yeah, so let's dive into it. So as I'm sure you know, my main instrument is guitar. So naturally I do a lot of guitar recording in my home studio. My main go-to instrument right now is my Ibanez RG752AHM. Absolutely beautiful instrument, plays impeccably. I love everything about it. I actually did another separate video just on that guitar if you'd like to check it out. I also use another Ibanez RG7321. It's an older 7-string model I've had for a long time, and I still love the way it plays, even though it's much cheaper model than my 752. Still an excellent guitar, and I love the DiMarzio Blaze pickups I have in it. I also use a Fender Stratocaster, just an American standard, for some of my lead playing and for non-metal music that I write and play. On my first EP, Instantiate, a few of the solos were tracked with the Stratocaster to give it a nice contrast from the humbucker style tones that I was using with the 7321. I didn't have the 752 when I was making that EP. So yeah, those are really all of the guitars that I use. I've never been a crazy guitar collector. I don't have a million guitars laying around. I kind of like to keep my choices limited so that I spend more time playing and writing as opposed to thinking about which guitar I want to use for a certain part. Next in line after the guitars is my pedal board. Believe it or not, I've only recently gotten into using analog effects. When I was growing up, first getting serious about guitar, I had a Line 6 Spider amp, as many of you probably did or may still have. Great practice amplifier. Don't let anybody talk some trash about the Spiders. It's not cool. But yeah, I just never had any effects pedals because there were effects on the amp and I wasn't recording at that point, so if it sounded cool in the practice room, that was all I needed. But earlier this year, I decided I wanted to get into more of a modular approach to effects and gear, to where I could pick and choose specific pieces of gear I wanted for specific purposes without having to commit to like an entire amp modeling rig or something like that where all the effects are just included. I've only got a few pedals at the moment. At the front, I've got a tuner, because you gotta stay in tune. Just after that, I have the Ego compressor by Wampler Effects, which is an incredible pedal. I'll get into more details about each of these pedals in separate videos, but my favorite feature of the Ego compressor is the blend control. I use it on distorted tones with just a tiny bit of the compressed signal blended in to give a little bit more weight to what I'm playing in sections that are heavier, because I like to use passive pickups. After that in the chain, I've got the Horizon Devices Precision Drive, which is a really cool effect. It's a Tube Screamer style overdrive with a built-in noise gate and an attack knob that acts as an EQ, kind of like a high-pass filter in some ways. As you increase the attack control, you tighten up the low range of the signal, making it to your preamp, giving you a lot of options for how much low-end dirt you want to give your amp to work with. After that, I have two modulation effects that go into the effects loop section. The first being the Walrus Audio Julia chorus vibrato pedal. Not a lot of metal players use chorus a lot anymore, but it's one of my absolute favorite effects, and the Julia is just the best chorus effect I've ever heard, period. I really love that it can do a combination chorus and vibrato. Very cool sound, has such a nice warmth to it, and it can fit in really well in a lot of contexts. And after that, I have the Seymour Duncan Dark Sun, which is Mark Holcomb of Periphery's signature delay reverb pedal. It's a combined unit with a nice digital hall reverb, very lush sound that can get dialed in from anywhere from very subtle room coloration to absolutely just drowning something in waves of reverb. The delay section has a lot of time options, with like triplets, dotted eighths. You can even do reverse notes, all kinds of stuff, ping pong delays, all just in one unit. It also has some built-in filtering that you can apply to delay and reverb equally, or you can apply them selectively. Yeah, that's my simple pedal board at the moment. Maybe I'll add on to it in the future, but I'm really loving this setup right now. So guitars and effects are great and all, but if we want to record anything we can manipulate digitally, we need an audio interface. Not gonna shock anyone here when I say that my audio interface is a Focusrite Scarlett 18i20. Very popular model. It just does the thing. Really simple layout, fits nicely under my desk in the like keyboard tray. It's got 8 inputs, combined instrument XLR, which can be added onto with a separate Focusrite product. And it's also got 8 outputs to route audio in all sorts of different ways. And it's affordable. So if you're looking for a good home studio audio interface that has more than just a couple of channels, I would definitely recommend the 18i20. Okay, so we talked about guitars, pedals, and my audio interface. Now I want to get into some of the software I use to bring all this to life. So first up, let's talk about amp simulators. This is the Logic session for my newest song, A Dark Embrace. I'll put a link to that new track in the description of this video if you'd like to give it a listen. But yeah, I used some products from Neural DSP to make this song and all of my first EP instantiate. For me, working in the home studio, amp simulation plugins like this are absolutely indispensable, whereas I can't really get super nice tones from miking up a cabinet, and I don't have a well-treated room, so just removing all of that headache from the equation is just so nice. On the 752 track that I was mentioning earlier that I recorded with the RG752, I'm using the Archetype Nolly amp suite from Neural DSP. Very versatile product here. You've got your own built-in effects plugins that you can use with either analog effects or just on their own. They all sound great. Got a nice compressor, overdrive, front-end delay, which is pretty unique. I actually have a video up for a song I wrote called Anima that is demoing this amp suite specifically, if you'd like to check that one out. Here we've got the like head section of it. Got 4 different heads you can use. All of them sound very unique. And the controls are pretty self-explanatory, you know, just like a real amp, which is kind of crazy. Here we've got an EQ section, and this EQ can be assigned individually to each of the amp heads for a single channel strip setting. Also got a cabinet section. If you've used any Neural DSP products, this is very familiar to you. Got a few different IRs you can mix together or just use on their own. Phase controls, the whole deal. It's like you're working with a real cabinet, but it's a piece of software that costs less than $200 and sounds fantastic. So on that track, I used this like mid-gain head option with the matching cabinet to record that guitar track. On the other track, let's see if I can find it, I used another Neural DSP product, which is an amp model of the Fortunatus, or the NTS in this case. This amp sounds a good bit different than anything that is in the Archetype Nolly collection. I think this one sounds a good bit darker, but it can still stay really tight and punchy. I love the tone of this amp sim. It has everything from just wide open, aggressive, high gain tones to some more refined, controlled gain tones that are more mid gain sounding that I tend to like to use. Very familiar setup here. You've got some front end pedals. A good bit different here. These are all Fortin pedals. This is a built-in noise gate that I like to use. Hex drive is pretty cool. Really chaotic though. Yeah, very nice for like sludgy or doom sort of sounds. And then again, you've got the impulse response section. This particular plugin only has 1 amp model, but that 1 amp model sounds really sick. I've also used the Fortin Nameless suite. I didn't use it in this track, but all of the guitars on my first EP Instantiate were made with the Fortin Nameless suite. Okay, so we've talked about amp simulation. Let's look at some other plugins that I use to sculpt tones and actually mix. So 90% of my mixing changes come down to 2 things, EQ and compression. And we'll take a look at EQ first. So Logic has a pretty nice just stock channel EQ plugin. If you're unfamiliar with what EQ is, you can think of it as a frequency-specific volume control that allows you to adjust the relative levels across the entire spectrum of your source. Yeah, the Logic stock plugin just has a nice interface. You can control it with the mouse, or you can control it down here by typing in a specific value, something like that. A lot of different options. It just does the thing, and it's included with the software. So next up, we'll take a look at compression. So compressors act on the volume of a sound to either cut the loudest parts down in volume, bring the quietest parts up in volume, or a combination of both to like squish a signal and compress it, hence the name compressor. So the Logic stock compressor has these 7 circuit types. I don't particularly have a favorite one that I use repeatedly. I just kind of flip through them when I'm working and figure out which one fits the vibe in that moment. Standard compression controls also support for side chaining if you want to do that kind of thing. Yeah, again, it just does the thing. So let's take a look at the mix bus as well. On the mix bus, I have a limiter in place, another stock Logic plugin, really just to keep everything tame and keep everything at a consistent volume level, which for heavy music is essential. Simple controls, simple layout, nice piece of software. Okay, other than that, something that I find myself repeatedly going back to is this reverb plugin called Chromaverb. Very, very cool plugin. It's an algorithmic reverb with a lot of different options. Here on this details page, you've got an EQ section specifically for the reverb that won't affect your input signal. So you can get really detailed in how you sculpt your reverbs with this. And the main section has your familiar reverb controls, dry, wet. This is basically a room size control. How long do you want the tails to last? Other nice controls here. And you've got a few different room types. Well, I say a few. There's a lot of them. To be specific, that's 14 different room types you can use to give your reverb a different character. Very nice plugin. I use it all the time. Other than that, lastly, I want to mention the vintage EQ collection that is included in Logic. If I can find an instance of it. Here we go. So this is an instance of, oh, no, that's the channel EQ. Silly me. Console EQ, there we go. So this is an instance of the vintage EQ collection, which was added to Logic sometime last year, I think. And like the name describes, it's a collection of vintage preamp style EQs. I can't recall the name of the hardware that this is actually modeled after, but I know the look. Someone might know the name. You could leave it in a comment. But I tend to use this plugin for mainly the drive control here. I use it on guitars when I'm summing them together into a mix bus to kind of warm them up a little bit and give that bus a little bit of glue. And on other sources, I use the EQ controls to give more of a broad sculpting after I've done the initial sculpting with the channel EQ. So other than the console EQ here, there are also graphic and tube EQs in that same collection, which all sound really, really great. I want to quickly run through the various software instruments I use to fill out my arrangements and songs. First, we'll take a look at Get Good Drums, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I used the Invasion kit on my newest song, A Dark Embrace. This is a look at the interface of it here. I like this full kit view where you can actually swap out the cymbals and all the pieces from here instead of having to do them in individual submenus. You can do it in submenus like specifically the snare. If I want to change that here, I can, which is nice if I'm like working with the various mic levels and I want to test different snares just in that situation. Works really well, but I really appreciate the full kit interface here. It makes it easy to keep track of everything going on with it. If you have not tried Get Good Drums and you were looking for a drum library, just stop searching and just buy one of them. You will not regret it. Other than that, I also use the Eurobass 2 on this song from Submission Audio. Let's see if I can find that track in here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. Here it is. So the Eurobass 2 is a sampled bass instrument, very useful for high gain music. The built-in distorted tone is just slamming. Really, really good. But it's versatile in that you can use just the DI signal if you want to go for more of your own like handmade sort of tone. You have that option. Lastly, I want to look at the synth suite that I use, which is the Analog Lab 3 from Arturia. I have an Arturia MIDI controller, and that MIDI controller came with this software suite, which is basically a very large collection of synth presets that you can filter by instrument, by type, by genre, by whatever, and you can adjust them in a limited fashion from their preset form to dial in a tone that you like. I've made many tones that I've used, some that I forgot to save, the classic tragedy of messing around with synth tones. These are some of the ones I've saved in the past. Very, very cool plugin if you're looking for an entry-level software synthesizer option. Other than the things I just went through, I have this set of PreSonus Aris monitors, which I use for monitoring, and I have an Arturia Keylab Essential MIDI controller that I use for writing synth parts or testing out harmonies with a piano patch. So how does this all fit together for me to actually make a record at home? Like, what parts of my setup are helping me do that? For me, the key lies in the simplicity and modularity of my setup. I only have a few guitars to work with, which could be a good or bad thing, but for me, it lets me spend more time playing and writing instead of thinking about which guitar I want to use to record one part, or how many different guitars do I need to have in this song, and all of that. I've only got a few effects pedals, which each have their own specific purpose and reason for being on my board, and I try to limit myself to stock Logic plugins as much as possible, because they sound good, I already paid for them, and I know how to use them, which in reality is the most important thing. Now, some people also make music with simpler setups than me. If you're not a guitarist, let's say you're a vocalist, you could make music with just a microphone and a one-channel audio interface, and then use software instruments for the rest of your arrangements. Or let's say you make beats, then all you really need is a computer and something to listen back to it with, which could be headphones or a set of monitors or anything. I'm a big fan of simple setups. Some people disagree, but for me, it really helps me focus on the music and the quality of the work I'm doing as opposed to what gear I'm using. Yeah, so that is my setup from a very high level view. I didn't get into much detail about any one piece of gear or how I really use those pieces of gear. I just wanted to kind of give people an overview of what software, what effects, what guitars am I using on an everyday basis when I'm working on music. And this is pretty much it. What kind of setup do you have going? Are you making music at home? What parts of your setup do you find help you the most? I'd really like to hear other people's thoughts on this, so leave me a comment and we can talk about it. All right, I'm gonna get back to some songwriting for the day. I hope this was helpful and gave you some insight into how a home studio can be set up and what you need to get started. Until next time, friends.